Let's dive right into this explainer, because today we are uncovering the deeply interconnected operating system running beneath our everyday human experience. We so often think of health as this collection of separate, isolated habits, right? You diet, you exercise, maybe you take a daily vitamin. But what if we look far beneath the surface? Today, we're going to explore how a tiny, seemingly insignificant evening habit literally rewires your brain connectivity, regulates your nervous system, and fundamentally dictates your biological aging. It really comes down to one massive question. What invisible biological forces are shaping the quality of your life every single day? Now, what's fascinating is that the answer to that profound question doesn't start in a high-tech lab or a doctor's office. It actually starts in those quiet, often frustrating moments right before we fall asleep. We have all been there, staring up at the ceiling, feeling totally wired, unable to shut our brains off. But what is actually happening in your biology at that exact moment? Well, the answer reveals a massive, hidden paradox.
Get this, just 15 to 20 minutes of writing can fundamentally alter the human immune system. I know, that sounds impossible. How could the simple act of putting a pen to paper physically change the actual cells that hunt down pathogens in your body? It's wild. But to understand this hidden mechanism, we have to look at the invisible weight your brain carries into bed with you every single night.
It all comes down to a really fascinating psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect. Essentially, this is the evolutionary tendency for incomplete tasks to intrude on your consciousness way more than completed ones. When you're lying awake at night, this effect creates what sleep scientists call a prospective memory load. Your brain is basically desperately trying to hold on to tomorrow's unfinished business, and in doing so, it elevates your autonomic nervous system activity. It keeps your fight-or-flight response engaged, which effectively blocks you from getting any restorative sleep. But the fix for this is highly counterintuitive.
This reveals a surprising truth discovered by researchers at Baylor and Emory University. We constantly hear about gratitude journaling, right? Focusing on the past. And hey, that is fantastic for your mood, absolutely. But evidence shows it doesn't actually speed up sleep onset. Offloading tomorrow's future tasks, however, that completely satisfies your brain's completion monitoring system. Simply writing down your to-do list signals to your deepest biology that it is, finally, safe to power down. And the result of that simple offloading? 9 minutes. You literally decrease the time it takes to fall asleep by an average of 9 minutes. Now that might sound small at first glance, but compounding that nightly reduces your sleep debt, it minimizes nighttime awakenings, and it drastically enhances your emotional processing during REM sleep. But you know what? This is just the outer layer. The most important insight is still coming. Let's look a bit deeper into the brain.
Which brings us to rewiring the emotional brain. So, we've solved the logistical to-do list. But what about the emotional residue of the day? Your brain actually stores memories in two completely different formats, based on ancient survival mechanisms. Raw emotional experiences are held in the amygdala. They're stored as fragmented, sensory threats that literally feel like they are happening right now. But the hippocampus stores memories safely in the past, neatly organized as a structured narrative. Expressive writing physically forces your brain to convert memories from a state of active amygdala-driven panic into a safely filed story. You aren't changing what happened. You are literally changing how your brain files it. And this brings us to Dr. James Pennebaker's inhibition theory, which reveals a profound biological cost. Suppression is not free. It requires ongoing cognitive and physiological effort. It's exactly like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. If you don't process your emotions, holding on to them acts as a chronic physiological stressor. Expressive writing is the physical act of finally letting go of that underwater beach ball. This happens through a really cool biological mechanism called affect labeling. When you put your feelings into words, you engage the left inferior frontal gyrus. That's the language center of your brain. Doing this actively dampens the reactivity of the amygdala and increases regulation from your prefrontal cortex. You literally shift your brain from a passive, avoidant posture into an active state of engagement. But the brain is just the starting point here. Where does this signal go next?
Let's move down into the body, to activating the vagus nerve.
This is exactly where psychology becomes visceral physiology. Enter vagal tone. The vagus nerve is this massive neural superhighway connecting your brain straight to your heart, your lungs, and your gut. Your vagal tone is its activity level, which dictates your nervous system's capacity to return to a parasympathetic rest and digest state after a stressful event. A higher vagal tone means you possess high emotional resilience. Think of it as the body's internal brake pedal against chronic fight or flight.
So let's track exactly what happens when you press that brake pedal, shifting from sympathetic worry over to parasympathetic rest. Cortisol goes from being elevated to significantly reduced,
which finally allows melatonin to release. Your heart rate variability rises. The amygdala calms down. And incredibly, this is the crazy part. Your immune markers physically shift from a state of high inflammation to normalized cellular defense. Narrative writing actively forces your biology across this spectrum, demanding restoration.
And the time required to trigger this incredible chain reaction? Just 20 minutes. Researchers at the University of Arizona discovered that merely 20 minutes of narrative expressive writing for 3 consecutive days measurably improves heart rate variability. You are essentially training your nervous system for long-term resilience. But what if we just ignore this biological need? What happens to ourselves when we just push through?
That brings us to the physical cost of unfinished business. When you leave cognitive and emotional stress unprocessed, your HPA axis, your body's central stress control center, stays hyperactive. It chronically elevates cortisol, which literally suppresses your T lymphocytes, stripping your immune system's ability to hunt down pathogens. Systemic inflammation rises. Your gut barrier actually weakens. Unfinished mental business is not just a psychological nuisance, folks. It is a profound physical threat that accelerates aging.
But thankfully, we have a built-in defense mechanism. According to a 2017 neuroimaging study, expressive writing physically increases the functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. This means that writing doesn't just momentarily calm you down, it structurally thickens the neural pathways in your brain, permanently upgrading your thinking brain's ability to govern your emotional brain. You are quite literally rewiring your own hardware.
So let's look at the architecture of deep recovery. How do we actually apply all of this? First rule, it absolutely has to be analog. Modern technology completely disrupts our ancient biology here. Screens emit 460 to 480 nanometers of blue light. That is a very specific wavelength that stimulates retinal cells to completely halt your sleep-inducing melatonin production. So if you try to offload your thoughts onto a smartphone notes app, you're just blasting your circadian clock with daylight. You solve a psychological problem, but you create a massive biological one. Pen and paper are non-negotiable here. So here is the exact 2-step architecture for deep recovery. Phase 1 happens early in the evening. You offload tomorrow's logistical tasks onto a to-do list to instantly satisfy that Zeigarnik effect we talked about. Then, Phase 2, right before bed, use narrative expressive writing to process your emotional residue. Just put your feelings into a structured story. By splitting your evening into these 2 distinct phases, you systematically eliminate both the logistical worries and the raw emotional stressors that keep your sympathetic nervous system firing on all cylinders. Because ultimately, health is not a collection of separate, isolated habits. It is the emergent result of countless interconnected biological processes occurring every moment of every day. A simple pen and a piece of paper aren't just writing tools, they are scientifically validated instruments of nervous system regulation. They shape your brain connectivity, they dictate your immune resilience, and they optimize your longevity. So the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what underwater beach balls are you still holding on to, and how much your biology transformed tonight if you finally choose to let them go?